about subject contrast. Subject contrast. Subject contrast is going to be the information in the remnant beam, the signal carried to the image receptor that will give us our image contrast. Generally speaking, mass doesn't affect contrast. Remember, contrast is the difference in brightness between two adjacent structures, right? If you double the MAS, both structures get darker, and they get darker equally, right? So bone and muscle has one set of contrast, right? You add more mass, both of them now get darker, so the contrast doesn't change, okay? But at the extremes, we'll see changes. Okay, so generally, mass is not a factor for subject contrast. Mostly that's controlled by the body type, the tissues you're going through, bone, muscle, fat, and gas, right? And the X-ray beam's energy. It does not change the minimum, average, or peak energies in the beam. MAS does not change beam energy. All the interactions change proportionally when you change mass. That's what I was getting at, right? Bone versus muscle, right? Add mass, both get denser equally, proportionally. Change in MAS does not alter the percentage contribution of the different types of interactions to the image. That's just a fancier way of saying what I just said. Subject contrast is determined by the percentage contributions from the different interactions. Again, just a fancier way of saying as you double mass, both structures get darker together, okay? Mass does not affect subject contrast except for at the extreme ends, the wildly overexposed ends and the wildly underexposed ends. Then we affect contrast. Not enough MAS to get through the body, that affects contrast by being insufficient. Too much MAS oversaturates the image receptor. And last notes here, MAS is not an electrical, rephrase that. MAS is an electrical factor. It's not a geometric factor, right? With the hands that they showed you, or the catheter they showed you, changing MAS didn't change the shape or size of the catheter, right? Or the hand. It just changed how bright or dark the hand was. It can affect model. It can't affect recognizability. So it has no effect on sharpness, no effect on magnification, distortion, or any geometric factor. Okay? The only things that can affect those are what we described earlier, all those geometric changes. OID, SOD, focal spot size. But you can have an effect on the geometric factors by having incorrectly set your mass. And here's how. Time and motion. Okay? As you add more exposure time, you can raise your mass, right? You can add more X-rays by just letting it go for longer, okay? But motion is the biggest enemy of detail, and with more time, there's more possibility for motion. Think of a chest X-ray, right? The hand or something like that, sure, keep the hand still. Patient has a tremor, we weight the hand down, sandbag on the hand, right? So we can minimize motion in lots of circumstances, but peristaltic motion, the motion of our heart, the motion of our intestines, you can't change those things, right? You can't tell someone, hey man, just for just like 1 second here, I just need you to pause your heart, right? Because it doesn't work, right? So what can we do? We can minimize the amount of exposure time, minimizing the number of contractions the heart will have in the given exposure, right? So in that way, we can use time, which is part of mass, to affect detail, sharpness of detail, by minimizing motion. Said in the simplest way possible, everything on here considered, the shorter the exposure time, the sharper the image is likely to be due to patient motion. Okay, if you can minimize the evidence of motion, you can maximize detail. And you know that because when you take a picture of somebody, you have them hold still, right? Or you take it in a good lighting setting, so the amount of exposure time can go down. I'm talking about literally a camera, right? You ever notice like when you take images in the nighttime or in the dark, it takes longer to make the exposures, right? It's because there's less light, so you take longer for the light to come in, and the thing that you're taking the image of might move around, right? In the bright daylight, You can take very clear images even when things are moving fast. Because there's a lot of light coming into the camera, the information's there, so we can use a shorter exposure time. If you've done anything in photography, it will greatly help you in radiography. So, taking pictures will help you understand radiography for sure. All right, I want to